This is The Strategy Inside Everything. I'm Adam Pierno. The Strategy Inside Everything is the podcast for people who think for a living. If this conversation gives you an idea, leads to a question, or makes you want to push back on something you hear, go to that'snotaninsight.com, where you can leave a message or send me a voicemail. The best and most interesting will be added to the future episodes, and I can't wait to hear from you. All right, welcome back to another episode of The Strategy Inside Everything. Very much looking forward to my conversation today with a longtime acquaintance and finally getting to see each other face to face. Adrian Ho is the co-founder and chairman of the board at Zeus Jones. Adrian, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you. Good to meet you finally as well.
Adrian, I wanted to talk to you because of something you've launched from within Zeus Jones. But I think for people just getting to know you, or maybe they know your reputation at Zeus Jones, it'd be really helpful if you could talk a little bit about your career, kind of where you've been and what you've done before getting to this point, although you've been at Zeus Jones and built quite a track record there for 15 years. But talk about what led up to that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I have a bit of a sort of cliched advertising story. I obviously did not train to be in advertising, fell into it. But I would say my career really has been primarily as an account planner or strategist in agencies. My first job was in Los Angeles at an agency called Lord Dentsu and Partners. It was a Dentsu Young and Rubicam agency. And it was a great first job. I worked with someone who had been very classically trained as a researcher. So I really learned how to do research properly. And then I moved from there to J. Walter Thompson in San Francisco. I was there briefly for about a year. And then from there, I went to an agency that was called Anderson Lemke, also in San Francisco. They were famous for B2B technology advertising. I worked on Microsoft and a bunch of other technology businesses there, and then went from there to Goodby Silverstein, which is also in San Francisco. Was there for a couple of years working on HP and a bunch of other things. And then went to Fallon in 2001, I think. Yeah, it was 2001. Became head of planning at Fallon. I was there for, I think, 6 years, something like that. It was, honestly one of the best places I ever worked. And there I met my business partners who, kind of like me, decided that we were, obviously fascinated by the idea of brands and business and trying to impact growth for companies, but felt really hamstrung by the just the tools of traditional advertising. Yeah, and I would say I would use traditional advertising broadly because Fallon back at that time obviously was really one of the pioneers. I mean, it was the time of BMW films and the whole thing. Yeah,
and Goodby before that, where you were.
And Goodby, yeah. I mean, I think, obviously these were places that did advertising and do advertising really, really well. But I think we just started to see that there are really a lot of problems that advertising cannot address. It's just not designed to address it. And then there's, obviously been a lot written about just how the advertising market has become so saturated and less effective over time. So it was a kind of confluence of those things that led us to starting Zeus Jones in 2007. And
do you, when you say the advertising market was saturated, do you mean in terms of getting impressions that mean something to consumers, or do you mean in terms of the number of agencies selling services to brands?
Yeah, no, it was definitely the challenge of getting attention from consumers.
And that's only gotten worse.
It absolutely, it's only gotten worse. I mean, I've told this story a number of times, but when I started at Anderson Lemke, we ran Microsoft's advertising business and digital advertising business. And literally the very first meeting I went to, was a meeting to discuss what we should do about the fact that click-through rates had fallen from 30% to 5% on banners. I don't even know. I mean, it's 0.000005% at this point.
Do you
isn't it?
know
Like
how many bottles of champagne would be opened if someone got a 5% click-through rate on a banner?
Oh my God. I mean, it was incredible. It really, and obviously I was in San Francisco during that whole kind of .com boom. So that there was just so much unreal about that whole time. But yeah, that was one of the things. And I think it was really exciting. And honestly, it was, that experience was one of the things that led me to Zeus Jones. My boss and I wrote a very unpopular paper at Anderson Lemke when Microsoft was paying us, I think it was like $30 million to manage their digital advertising business. And the whole point of the paper was that we were applying a communications methodology to digital advertising. Communications is one way, digital is obviously two-way. And even more complex these days. And you know, our point of view was we needed to rethink it. So that didn't go down too well, but I think it was absolutely the genesis for, you know, in 2007 when my partners and I really started to think about, you know, there were just a whole series of new tools, new opportunities developing. And so that's when we started Zeus Jones. And, you know, many probably know that the idea behind Zeus Jones was and is to see if we could take everything that we were doing from a branding and marketing standpoint and put it into the center of companies rather than wrap it around the outside.
It's not just icing that you put on the top.
We hope so, yeah. And I think you know, it's taken a while. I would describe this as a journey, but we were moving from really, you know, sort of being on the periphery of a company's business to trying to be somewhat more central to it. And I think I think we've achieved some of that goal. We do, you know, I would describe ourselves these days as really a brand and business innovation company. Mm-hmm. We do brand and business innovation at really 3 different levels. So we do new brand and new product innovation, where it's really what we're doing. We're not product innovators, but what we found is that if you build the brand and product proposition at the same time, you can get a much better overall package and much more effective performance in the marketplace, as well as you can just get things into market much more quickly.
Yeah, so if those things are aligned and streamlined, people understand what the functional benefit and the emotional benefit are as one cohesive package. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, and so I say that's probably the truest version of what we originally thought we were going to do. Right. But then we now do a lot of, and we have done for a few years, what I would call capability innovation, which is we help companies stand up new divisions or new departments in order to, typically go after new kinds of growth or new kinds of marketing opportunities. So most recent examples were we helped Nike stand up Studio 365, which is essentially the division that is responsible for Nike editorial. Yep. And so its purpose is to tell stories 365 days a year, one-to-one with athletes all around the world. And so that was an example. We helped to stand up Target's own brand management group, which is the group that basically drives all of the decision-making and creation for all of its own brands. Mm-hmm. And then, another example is we helped stand up Fidelity's mobile practice, which, obviously was designed to try and figure out how to engage with new people in new ways and those sorts of things.
Yeah, that's a huge undertaking, to say the least.
Yeah, those are pretty complex. And then the third kind of innovation that we do is what I would call future market innovation, but it's really based around long-range planning. And so we work with leadership teams, to try and imagine, well, what's the world going to look like in 5, 10, 15 years? And as a result of that, what are the markets that we see emerging, and then as a result of that, how can we put ourselves in an advantaged position to capture value in those markets. And so you can tell that the three things that we do are pretty complementary. So often it does start with future market innovation. As a result of that, we realize we have to do some capability innovation because there's something that we need to be able to do that we can't do right now.
Right.
And then as part of that, we might need to do some new brand and product innovation as well.
How much of that is based on your introduction to the business as with research being such a focus and such a big part of your training, understanding research, understanding the principles of that and the methodologies there? How much do you think that you credit that for your ability to take those forward looks?
I would say there's obviously a very analytical part of what we have to do. Because everything has to make sense from a financial standpoint and an investment standpoint. So I'd say to that extent, it works really, really well. Honestly, I feel that my education really began in earnest once we started Zeus Jones. I think that we knew so little about how business really, really works and about what's really important from our previous experiences. And again, I think we were working with great companies and we had great clients who were very, very open and partnering with us at places like Fallon and Goodby. But the decision making that a company goes through means that advertising is really one of the last things that you think about.
Yes.
And so we were just not exposed to a lot of the very early thinking that companies would do before a brief would ever even get generated, Right.
Yeah. And that's a problem that agencies run into all the time, where they want to go upstream and ask questions that have already been decided 2 years ago in the product cycle, where it's like, sorry, too late. It's going to be aimed at, preteens. That's who's the audience.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So you just mentioned, go ahead.
Sorry, no, you go ahead.
Well, you just mentioned, understanding the business and making good investments as well. And the reason that I did finally schedule this conversation was because reading about what you've launched with Demos, which is an investment fund that runs, is it through Zeus Jones or in partnership with Zeus Jones? I think it's a standalone company, but it sounds like, you're involved and it sounds like the leadership team is involved.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so I think it actually all comes out of what I just spoke about, but increasingly as we started moving more into those areas of work, those areas of business and brand innovation, we started to see that obviously there were things that we just weren't capable of delivering on our own. A few years back, what we had started was another company. It's called Nostos. And really it's a community of independent, I think values aligned, but very, very sort of diverse in skill set, creative companies, where we could sort of partner with them. And we could bring a fuller solution to one of our big clients who was like, yeah, I can see you can do this bit of it, but can you do these other bits that I need to have done? So I said that was an important part of the evolution to Demos, which was starting to understand that we should think about, Zeus not as like this full service kind of vertically integrated thing, but maybe as more of a collection of companies, an ecosystem, a group, all those sorts of things. So there was a lot of thinking that we did around, what other parts, if we are now kind of a collection of, or a group, if you will, what other parts would we bring? And so there's sort of the theory about it, which is that any good business ecosystem brings ideas, talent, and capital. And so we kind of realized, well, capital is one of these things that we know we have no access to. But that wasn't sort of the only thing. What we started to get into more and more was the idea that as we were doing innovation for our clients, what we started to come across was the realization that most big companies only spend so much to, actually performing innovation. Mm-hmm. They spend a lot more buying innovation. And, one of the big reasons is because it's honestly a lot easier to innovate outside of a company than it is to innovate inside of a company. And so it's a lot less risky for a client, for a big company to say, I'm just going to outsource a lot of that innovation, and I'm going to buy it when someone else has solved all the problems that I need to have solved. Right. And even though they're paying a lot more for it, it is actually a lot more efficient over the long term. And they've done a lot of analysis to show that, you can squander a ton of money trying to build these things internally.
Yep.
And so clients actually came to us and said, we wish you could be engaged in some way in helping us find and grow some of these innovations from the outside. And so and then I think that the catalyst, honestly, was, everything that happened with the pandemic, in particular, everything that happened with the murder of George Floyd, and just the chaos that, we were really obviously being in Minnesota central to. We started to really think much more deeply about how we could make a difference, and were we actually doing everything that we possibly could to try and advance the things that could be part of the solution, and so that's really what Demos came about, and the idea was that if we can find startups that really align with a lot of the expertise that we have, maybe actually are really complementary to a lot of the partners that we already work with and the things that they're trying to do. And we could engage with those startups, not just through Zeus, which is obviously through the ideation and all of that sort of stuff, but also through Demos, which just provides a bit more capital efficiency and lets them work with us in more effective ways, that we could potentially accelerate some of the progress that we were trying to make. And so that's really, if that makes sense, that's really what it's about.
No, that's a great background. Is the idea that the companies that Demos invests in become part of that constellation of companies that Zeus Jones is a part, or are they standalone companies that you're an investor in and then you help as an advisor to shepherd them to whatever their growth or exit or whatever the trajectory is that's right for that individual business?
Yep. No, it's very much the latter.
Okay.
So we have made two investments, which I think you may already know about. The first one we made is in a company called Dimensional Energy, and they take captured carbon dioxide and they transform it into jet fuel. They chose jet fuel because aviation is probably one of the most difficult to decarbonize industries, just because long haul flights require so much fuel that the batteries would be so heavy that you couldn't do it. We know a lot about that business because we work a lot in agriculture, and so we knew a lot about the carbon sequestration, carbon credits, carbon offsets, carbon capture industry, and we realized that this is a place where we could help. And then the second investment we've made is with a company called Joywell Foods. They have they've discovered a series of proteins that grow naturally in places like Africa, and they taste like sugar, but they digest like a protein. So basically, it means you can get sweetness without any of the glycemic spikes or or side effects that sugar creates. And then in addition, they scale it up using fermentation, which means that they greatly and dramatically, I think it's to the order of about 90%, reduce the amount of greenhouse gas that is emitted through the production or the environmental devastation that sugar has been wreaking. So
two benefits at least.
It honestly it's incredible. And these proteins were designed by nature to taste like sugar, so they taste like sugar, but they just digest like a protein, which means that they're actually kind of good for you, which is insane. So as you can imagine, that's sort of a game changer for a lot of products, and we've done in the past, and we continue to do a lot of work in food. We work with Nestle, we work with Chipotle, we work with General Mills. So this was a case where we not only we know about the category, we know about and we work with a lot of the partners that a company like Joywell might engage with to bring products to the market. So again, we're sort of we know we can really help and similar sort of thing, which is because Joywell's a startup, they can't spend a fortune on growth.
So they need your help being smart about where they invest in that growth.
Yeah.
How these are, I've heard you describe these as transformational businesses. Are there other areas of transformation that you're focused? And is the team at Demos actively seeking transformational business? Is it a kind of a pitch? What's the process for identifying these organizations? And that must be competitive.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, I think, so if you know anything about the venture capital world,
I know just enough to have a small ulcer from thinking about it.
Yeah, and we've grown several ulcers on top of that small one that you probably know have. But it's a bit of a backwards world, isn't it? The reality is that for someone like us who has no history and very little money, we're just not going to get access to the best kinds of deals. So that's true for the vast majority of funds. So I think what we've realized is that our partners are actually some of the top venture capital companies. And I was describing this to sort of a friend, which is like, we can come in, we can help them with one of their investments as a tag along. And really it costs them very little, and we can perform some pretty valuable services that would make their investments probably more effective. And so I think we're sort of like, we're sort of like, I use this analogy a lot, but like when you see one spider in your house, you're like, that's great. It's getting rid of the flies. When you see lots of them, there's a nest, right? But so we're like that one spider.
Providing value there.
Providing a tiny bit of value. It's not really doing very much harm. It's not. So that's the world that we live in. First and foremost. So I'd say like we can be selective to a certain extent, but I mean honestly, we're trying to help in this area, and we're trying to enter this without any previous experience or track record. Having said that, there's I think that there are a number of areas that we think are really, really, really important, and would love to be able to help in. So continuing on sort of the, I would say, energy/agriculture side, one of the amazing things about dimensional energy is that they literally can create energy from thin air. They use solar energy as a catalyst. They use carbon dioxide, which is available evenly everywhere on the planet. And then they can provide sort of fuel. They can actually turn their product into materials like plastics, into fertilizers. But one of the things that can't be provided is water. So there are a whole host of new companies that are working to try, and the science is already there, where you can basically use, they look like solar panels, but they can be set up in the desert, and they can actually
there's a
pull
company
water out.
here called Source that came out of ASU that generates water from sunlight.
That's right. And I think that technologies like that are going to be massively important, especially as we think about sort of being combined with technologies like dimensional energy to provide more self-sufficiency to cities and to maybe rural locations and all of those sorts of things.
Is the vision that, as you're thinking about, now you have Demos where you're working on being the investment partner and doing some of the forecasting that you do in kind of new category innovation, are you helping them to realize their path or think about, if you have a company like Dimensional Energy that is creating essentially a new product from the medium of energy, maybe you're coming to them and saying, okay, here's where you should be looking at turning that into this thing, because we think there'll be a need for more ag products that are part of the solution versus jet fuel.
Yeah, we're trying to, and I would say the sort of tonality is important. So I think what we can provide is a view into, we work with some of the leaders in food, in agriculture, in technology, and retail. As we work with them, this is how they see the future, and this is where they see the valuable markets developing. Obviously all of the people that we work with, they're going to have their own advisors, they're going to have their own strategy, but we provide an input that I think is sort of unique, which allows them to see partners, context, marketplaces that will be important to them, how other leaders are thinking about developing them. And so I think it is a data point in how a company like Dimensional, for sure a company like Joywell, might think about developing their products. So yeah, I think, as a great example, one of the great conversations we had with Jason Salfi, who is the CEO of Dimensional Energy, a couple months ago, was around forecasting. We were doing that really, and it's across many, many industries, shows that for many reasons, most of which have to do with environmental damage and those sorts of things. We're going to be moving to a society that just feels a lot more fragmented, where cities and city states start to be more important in some ways than federal governments, where cities seek to be more self-sustainable, where there's probably less of an ability to rely on national infrastructure, especially for shipping and those kinds of things. And you'll want to do more of the kind of production of energy and foods and all of that sort of stuff locally. Cities will want to do that. And we've just seen this as a trend that we see happening across the board. And so obviously for an organization like Dimensional, that's very, very interesting, because one of the benefits is they can really be located pretty much anywhere. They don't need to be located near, let's say, a mine or anything like that,
Yeah.
And so I think it's helpful in some ways. I don't know what Jason's going to do with that information, but I think it's helpful for them to know that that's where some of our clients see the world heading.
And it's interesting. I mean, what you're describing, correct me if I'm misinterpreting this or just getting like really excited to hear you talk about it, but what you're exciting is higher order account planning. I mean, you're doing the similar trend analysis and the audience for this is this type of person, and this is where I think they are now, and this is where they're headed. But it's on a bigger, not a stage, but it's just on a bigger scale, I guess.
Yeah, I think that, it's the first time I've heard anyone sort of describe it like that. So I think that's really interesting. But yeah, I think it's true. So I think what we were trying to always do was look for patterns of behavior, and to try and understand, how people are going to react to stimuli, and how they really think about things and how behavior really happens. And so, yeah, I would say you're absolutely right. I mean, we don't bring any deep understanding of technology to any of what we do.
Right. You can't be experts in the energy creation or, carbon capture process. Obviously not.
Not at all. But I think what we do is we bring an understanding of how culture reacts to technological advancement, as well as all of the disruption that's going on around the world, and then how life kind of evolves, or society evolves as a result of it. And so, yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think it is very much the skills that you would learn as an account planner, but yeah, applied sort of at a very future-oriented level, and then more of a systemic level. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, as a strategic thinker, what juicy projects those must be. Do you staff? Is it the same type of staff that is doing that forecasting that works on Zeus Jones projects, or is it a whole different skill set?
Well, so right now it's just me and one other person, Eric Frost, who's one of my co-founders, that work directly on Demos from Zeus. That's more of the fact that so the way that you make money in a venture fund is obviously you do a really good job of picking the investments, and you hope to make money at the end.
Right.
But that's like a 7 to 10 year sort of time frame. On a daily basis, the way that venture funds make money is that they take a percentage of the assets under management, and they use that as kind of operating capital to run the business. So we have very few assets under management, which means that the percentage of assets under management, it literally can't support it can't even support one of our salaries.
Yeah, you're essentially bootstrapping it.
Yeah. So what we're trying to do is to say, and then this involves a lot of, and as you probably know, we're independent, so we've never taken money from anyone, we never will, and the whole thing. It just involves a lot of kind of like rejiggering and thinking creatively about, like, as we look across our business, can we afford to take this on? And then who would be able to take this on if we could afford to take this on? And then how much resource, because we need to keep the core of the business going.
Yeah.
Because that's really what pays the bills. Yeah. So it's a lot of begging and borrowing time.
That's kind of how innovation practices work in general. I mean, to your earlier point about how it works inside a company that's trying to innovate, it's usually like, can I borrow 0.5 of their time for it's sort of like, what's that going over there? And then I'm over here, like, just while they're, And
distracted.
I don't want anyone to notice it until it's ready to be noticed. And I'll work overtime to do it as long as nobody asks me any questions about it. Yeah, I know.
Exactly.
You said something interesting. Zeus Jones, proudly independent. We've never taken any money. And yet Demos is an investment firm that is offering that. Talk about that as kind of the from the inside, the value you're providing, and how maybe you're approaching it differently as somebody that's been resistant to take on investment.
Yeah. Yeah, so and Demos, like all businesses, it pivoted a lot. We started off thinking, hey, we'll bring in some external investment into this because we need a chunk of money to play with,
fund,
and we need to be able to make money. We need to be able to pay ourselves. So we'd initially targeted sort of a $10 million fund in order, which would have been able to pay sort of salaries. What we started to realize was, like, one, why would anyone give us money? I mean, like, why would anyone give us money? I mean, obviously we know a lot of people, and so it wasn't like no one was willing to, but it just became a very sort of kind of like difficult conversation of like, well, you've got no track record at all, and what, is this really something that you know how to do, and so on and so forth. And then I'd say the second more important thing was, when as we partner with these bigger VC firms, us bringing more money doesn't make us more helpful. It just makes us more of a threat. So what we started to realize was like, actually, it doesn't, in order to get to the places we want to get to, we really don't want to have that much money. And we were able to basically raise all of the money we've needed so far and probably will need for the foreseeable future, just simply by having the founders and then Zeus and some other key Zeus people be essentially LPs and investors in the fund. So we're putting, I mean, it's very similar to what we did when we launched Zeus. We are putting our own money down to start something with the bet that we can turn something into this. So
yeah, and you found a way to fulfill the vision for Zeus Jones, which was to be more integrated into the companies you're working with. I mean, you're essentially there near the starting point and helping show them what's happening in culture, what's happening in their markets, and advising them and hearing feedback on it at a phase where you can do something with it versus just write a brief.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, you wouldn't have thought, because I mean, again, like I said, the amount of money that we're talking about here is trivial, but the idea that we've come in as an investor, a real partner, it changes the nature of the conversations we're able to have, and it changes the way that we can engage with our partners, In
the Zeus Jones side of the business, when you've had that breakthrough and become that partner, you mentioned Target, Nike, these are brands every single person listening to this knows. How do you think you've been able to crack that nut and be considered in that way versus the advertising partner that's going to write the brief and execute the ads at the end?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was like, I sort of mentioned at the beginning, but it was a long journey. At the very beginning, I think most of it was sort of all based around the idea that we would refuse to do things that were very traditional. So Jeff Goodby actually said this to me. He was like, what Goodby is much more about what we didn't do in the beginning than what we did.
It's just the assignments you pass on versus the assignments you take.
Absolutely. Because you can't undo a reputation that you've made. And so we spent a lot of years really trying to figure out how to kind of plot this path into being trusted for these assignments that were not advertising and not traditional communication. So a lot of us are rejecting communication. So there's a lot of that. And then I think we got to be known as sort of like, if you have a really interesting problem that can't be solved by a traditional communications company, then maybe you should call Zeus. And then so the other more pragmatic answer was, we've worked with most of our client partners, and I talk about them as individuals for years. In the case of Nike, we worked with the leader of that organization, that division, for over 20 years, because we worked with her at Nordstrom back when we were working on Fallon. On Nordstrom at Fallon, we worked with her on Nordstrom at Zeus. We've been part of kind of her career throughout the entire thing, and so I think there are a series of our partners that we grew with, and as they and obviously we partnered with them because there was some sort of aligned view of how we saw the world and what business should be about and how marketing could work, and so in many cases we followed our partners into organizations and into briefs and projects that they found themselves in. And then once we're there, we figure out how to do it in a really, I suppose, interesting way.
Yeah. It's one thing to say like, yeah, we knew we had to maintain our reputation. It's another thing to deliver over 20 years that, dependably. Yeah. That's not easy to do in this field.
Yeah. Thanks. I mean, I think these are, some of this is, we used to believe that we should bring innocence and naivety to everything. And obviously we've gotten a lot more sort of balanced about that. But I do think that as you sort of think about any of these ideas that we were talking about in terms of business and brand innovation, and capability is a great one, right? So why will a capability succeed, and why will it not succeed? Well, so of course there's a whole series of sort of operating models and processes and tool sets and those sorts of things that a capability is built upon. But I would say the real reason why something will succeed versus not is because the people that are working on it go, this is so inspiring and I want to get up and do this every single day. And I'm so drawn by the mission of what this represents, that I'm going to figure out a way to make this work. And that's all about, as going back to what you were saying, that's all about that kind of account planning idea of I want to help frame an insight or a strategy or an idea that's so, kind of inspiring and irresistible that we can then, we're not building a piece of communications around it. We're just building an organization around it. So,
yeah. And when you're choosing organizations to invest your time in that have a real mission that you can describe, it's not the cliche of we're changing the world that every, app manufacturer in the 2010s said,
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and I think such a perceptive idea because especially in organizations like Nike and Target, and companies where the brand is really, really important.
There's a cynical view there. Yeah, that the brand has to override.
Yeah, but being able to show the rest of the organization how your capability, how your division really supports and actually extends the brand idea, is a big part of getting that sort of landed and seated within the rest of the organization. So yeah, it really comes down to it. There's a lot of things that, and I've said this before in many other places, but we as planners and really as communications people, creative communications people, we have incredibly valuable skills, and they just aren't really utilized fully. If you're just sticking to communications.
Yeah, is that last question? Because I know I promised I would let you go. Is that true at Zeus Jones as a practice for the strategy team and for the planners? Are you leveraging that? Are you building that into their work to allow them to flex beyond communication? Are there even opportunities for that?
Well, we really don't do. I mean, we don't do any communications. So everything that we do is sort of non-communications centric. So
none of the work that passes through ends up hitting that level.
No, we don't do any communication whatsoever. So yeah, I mean, it's all. And increasingly, the people that we hire, they haven't necessarily come out of communications agencies. Some of them came out of clients. Some of them came out of totally different environments, totally different sort of strategic environments where I think there's a shared sort of idea that we understand how to frame a really inspiring idea that motivates and drives behavior. Mm-hmm. But in many cases, there's a whole bunch of contextual knowledge about, well, so what does that mean as applied to organization design? Or what does that mean as applied to experience design? Yeah. That is just as important. Yeah.
Well, Adrian, thank you so much for making time for me. I'm glad we were able to catch up and chat here.
Yeah, so great to meet you finally, Adam, and hopefully we can speak again. Not necessarily on air, but
yeah, I will be anxious to do that. Really appreciate your thoughtfulness here, and really enjoyed the conversation. I don't think you're seeking people to find you online, but where can people learn more about you and what you're doing at Demos? Zeus Jones.
I mean, I am on Twitter and I'm on LinkedIn, both under Adrian Ho. So I don't do the social media thing much these days, but I'll probably find it if you contact me there.
Very good. I will link to both of those in the show notes.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Great speaking with you.
All right. You too. Take care. Bye.
Strategy Inside Everything is produced by me, Adam Pierno. If you like what you've heard, leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Actually, I have no idea if that helps or if it's ever done anybody any good. If you really want to help the show and you like what you've heard, share it with someone else you think will dig it. That's the best way to help the show and keep the conversation growing. If you have an idea, a question, or want to push back, go to that'snotaninsight.com, where you can send me a message or leave me a voicemail that will be added to future shows. Music for the strategy inside everything is by Saw Square Noise. For more information on me, you can go to adampierno.com to learn about my books, my speaking, and my consulting practice. Thanks for listening.